Hey YouTube. The Allosaurus released in the horde test, and it's been going great. I'm just gonna skip to the montage. Hey YouTube, it's me back again from hiatus. I want to do this really quickly, right? First of all, I've reached out to a QA member to ask about if Allo is intended to be knocked over by objects. They said yes, for the same reason that Raptor is. The reason why it's not happening right now is simply just due to buggy quirkiness. Of course it will be fixed, hopefully soon, wunderbar. In fact, you can actually knock over Allos even right now on the terrain. It's just a little bit finicky. The second thing is, what are the devs sort of intending for Allo's gameplay in terms of the ecosystem? Allo seems to be a dinosaur that, while not very fast, is fast enough to catch you unawares, and if it is able to get that pounce, which is supposed to like bridge the gap between you and it can apply some DOT bleed to you, and that DOT will stop you from wanting to run away from the Allo and instead engage it head on. Allo itself is sort of like an ambusher and an endurance hunter put together, and currently Allo does not really intend to get ambush sprint at all, and we'll see if things change. It is not currently. Dante then goes on to say later on that actually no, it's probably not going to get it simply because Dante doesn't believe it needs the ambush sprint. I don't either, but I do think its speed should be increased. The reason why is Dibble and Allo currently, with their new speeds, are in range of Rex's ambush murder sprint. I personally believe that those dinosaurs should not just be in range of the murder sprint. It should be up to the devs to get as close, the Rex to get as close as possible to get the jump on them before they run. In fact, adding acceleration curves back into the game, you could make it so that Rex's ambush sprint skips the acceleration curve and it's like instant acceleration, while everything else in the game needs to accelerate a tiny bit, which allow dinosaurs like Allo and Rex with slightly lower speed tiers actually catch things off guard. This is just an idea, putting it out there, small 30-second solution in terms of thinking about it. Implementing it might take a bit more time. It's just a suggestion. You guys can think about that. One issue with Allo that I actually have a big sympathy for the creature is its trot speed. It is currently just barely faster trotting than Stego, which is a bit embarrassing, to be honest. I don't think we really want to... the line of Jurassic basically trots just slightly faster than a 6-ton herbivore. I'm very, very glad that speed mutations aren't in the game anymore. Because with if an Allo didn't have photosynthetic and a Stego did, the Stego would actually be able to trot you down. Which is really, really funny. Actually, that's hilarious to visualize, but whatever. This does lead to an argument that people could make, which is that because Dibble trots faster, if the Dibbles just stayed in an open field forever and remained vigilant, look out for Allos, they could run before the Allos get close and then trot away from the Allos, and the Allos would never be able to catch up to them. I agree. Mathematically, this is completely perfect. The issue is, it's not really fun, and kind of goes against Dibble's core gameplay. It's either meant to run away from the things it can't fight, aka the apexes, or deal with the mid-tiers. Currently, Dibble does not have the damage to deal against Allo. It can flip them very, very consistently, perfectly in fact, it doesn't have the damage to deal with a single allo, which means in situations where you have two allos, the dibble dies. So, like, we can argue about this later on. Second of all, obviously, the devs talked about the idea of adding in the new latch. How do you say? For Rex, right? Not Rex, sorry. The new latch for Allo, where it would have his feet on the ground. I've been lucky enough to know a lot of autistic people. I'm very privileged by that fact, who have been able to actually rig up this thing. I'm not going to give away what this is. It's something, don't worry about it. It's fine. But they were very, very kind enough to show me this and get the animations imported from the files for what it would probably look like using the animations in the game. And that's what the Pounce would look like. As you can tell, it's a little bit bare basics. Obviously, this was probably the work in progress version of the Pounce before the idea was like changed. We'll have to see what the new one is like. Obviously, the new one isn't in the files yet, but we'll have to see. Next point. Gosh, this is fast, isn't it? Next point. Allo's bleed is bugged. We'll be going over just how bugged it is later on. But yeah, as Dondi put it, we have inorganic levels of blood being lost. Yeah. We did a bunch of tests to tell if this was an Allo-specific issue, and yes, it is. We test the bleed from a bunch of other dinosaurs, and we were getting the same results that we normally got for bleed tests. Yes, at some point I will post a video about bleed testing again. Do not worry. But for now, we're just talking about Allo. Yeah. Another thing to mention about Allo, right? Another cool thing I'll post on the screen pretty soon is another autistic person posted using the model of Allo, trying to calculate how much the Allo actually weighs based on its model, which is really, really cool. So, like, who knows if Allo's size changes based on the elder size, for example, is pretty much acro size, by the way. I want you guys to know that. It's about the size of an acro. So, like, if the elder Allo model gets changed, or if the juvie size gets changed, you can blame these autistic people and their feedback. Look, I'm just an observer. I just like seeing what these people come up with. I find it fun. You know what I mean? Anyways, now it's time for me to not be autistic. Let's try and go into how much bleed the Allo is doing. So, we started off these tests. So we did the test with a bite and a claw swipe. For the bite, we got about, I think it was about 5%-ish bleed was lost on the bite, which I think might be about right. If you think about a sub-Allo, you'd imagine that a fully grown adult Allo at 2.8 tons as opposed to 1.2, 1.3 tons would be about double. So you can imagine about 10% bleed. It seems to be that bite bleed isn't bugged. We then did the claw swipe bleed, I believe, was the next one that we did in the video. It actually took me a couple of seconds to try and land the claw swipe. It was quite embarrassing, actually. And we did about 19% bleed. About that. We then checked the bleed of a Carno on a sub-Allo. This was just to check if it was all bleed that was bugged on Allo, either to and from. No, it's just bleed coming out. So we then checked Allo's bleed heal. So you can see the bleed heal a little bit. Just a rough idea of how fast it would be. Enjoy. We then did pouncing with the smaller Allo. You guys can see the results there. A sitting Carno was losing about, let's just see. I'm going through the video actually, by the way, while I'm talking. So about 0.2% while sitting, which using a coefficient, if by standing, it'll be about 2.1 times. If last time I checked, I could be wrong. Don't take it as gospel. But it's about 2.1 times. So instead of 0.2, it'll be about 0.4. And then, you know, you can then multiply that upwards. And we'll be doing these multiplication things in a bit. Don't worry about that. We then tested the bite speed for Allo and Carno. If you actually access the animation files for Allo, you will notice that the whole thing takes about half a second. It's a bit lower than half a second, but it's about half a second, let's just say. Carno's bite takes about 1.5 seconds. So if you remember when hordetest Carno first released, and we were knocking over like sub-Cerados and then just head-butting them to death, that time limit for the headbutt is about 1.5 seconds. And this was referred to as a machine gun, basically. Allo is 3 times that fast in terms of its bite. So we've gone from a machine gun to what I believe to be a Gatling sentry. Which is, the arms race in this game is genuinely incredible. You can actually see it. is probably a bit too fast, isn't it? And the bite is probably a bit too fast. I'd say probably bring it up to about a second delay or 1.5 second delay. It was actually very, very funny. If I can be bothered, I'll put a screenshot on it. Someone was complaining about Allo's bite force being nerfed in the files. And I said, like, for all we care, it's going to bite at like 0.5 in like, half a second to bite. It was funny that came true, whatever. So anyways, let's look at the Pounce. Right, so now we're actually going to look into the numbers with the calculator. I know, very, very exciting. Let's get into it. So the first Pounce we did with a just above 1.8 ton Allo against a Carno at 100% bleed. It was doing about 0.4 bleed per tick. We can actually prove this. You can do it yourself with the calculator. These will be the last two clips in the video before it starts to repeat. Don't worry about it. So the bleed time is about 131% seconds, right? Which is 90 seconds, let's just say, right? And the bleed was going down by 0.4. And you get 36. And the amount of bleed he lost in the video, you can calculate his final bleed, was about 36.36 bleed was lost total. The next Pounce we got was phenomenal. Somehow we managed to get the Allo bucked off after losing exactly 25% of its stamina. We can minus 5% of its stamina for the activation cost, which means 20% stamina was lost in the Pounce. Fantastic. We get a Pounce timer, or bleed timer, for this second Pounce. Was about 157, about 1 minute 57. So we can do 60 plus 57. The bleed lost during this was quite variable. At the start, the bleed was dropping by 1.22. Towards the end, the bleed slowed down to about half of that amount, and that's because everyone was sitting. However, by taking the 1.22 value, we can now extrapolate how much bleed this would have done over 117 seconds. So, let's get into it. We can multiply this by 1.22, knowing that Carno has no bleed res at all, it has no bleed res. Oh god, sorry, I'm laughing because I've already done the math. It's really, really funny. Knowing that Carno has no bleed res, that means it's taking the full brunt of 142% bleed from a 1.8 ton Allo, about the same size as it, from effectively 20% of the Allo's stamina. Right? That's what we know. So, knowing that an Allo has a total of 95% stamina remaining, so let's just round it up to 100%, right? And it's used 20. We can actually multiply this number by 5, right? To work out a full Pounce. So a full Pounce is about 713% of a Carno's bleed pool. So you guys might not know this yet, but a bleed pool is equal to your weight, as is your hunger capacity and your water capacity. It's all equal to your weight. So if you weigh 100 kilograms, your bleed pool's 100 kilograms, as is the amount of water and food you can eat is 100 kilograms. And actually, the amount of food you physically eat in the game will actually fill your stomach by the weight of that food, which is really, really cool. Right? If we just take a moment just to observe that, that's really, really cool. Some of you guys might not know that. Now you do. You're welcome. So, knowing that 100% of this value is 1.8 tons, we can now extrapolate what 713% is, which is basically, we can simplify this and move the decimal point this way and do 7.137 multiplied by 1.8 tons. So you can do 1.8 tons, which is 1,800 kilograms, times by that 7.137, and we get 12,846.6 kilograms worth of bleed. Now, that's quite large. That is actually, that is a ridiculously, I'm not going to say any rude words in this video, but you can imagine the words I could be using here. That is a unbelievably number, right? 12,886 bleed by a 1.8 ton Allo doing a full Pounce. And to explain to you how absolutely ludicrous this number is, right? If we just do rough math estimates and assume that all bleed is halved when you're sitting down, it pretty much is just about half, right? like let's just say it's about half. That means that if you were to dump your entire stamina bar into a stego as like a 1.8 ton allo, and the stego were to sit down immediately after getting pounced, it would still bleed out and die. You can divide it by 2, right? The allo, the stego weighs 6 tons, so it just bleeds out and dies. It's dead. I'm sorry, it's literally dead. You could pounce a Rex, full stamina bar. The Rex could kill you, and if it stands, it dies. It just dies. Oh my gosh! I can't explain. I can't quite explain to you guys how absolutely stupid this number is in any meaningful capacity. It's so dumb. I love it. I genuinely love it. What a fantastic bug. I feel sorry for everyone who's been afflicted by this. I've been afflicted by it. It's nutty. But just being able to look at that number and just visualize it is so amazing. You know, it's funny. I like it. Obviously, no shade towards the devs, as always. So, right. The question then becomes, how... sorry. There's actually a bit of further math we can do with this. Which is... I warn you, this is very, very dubious math, right? This is very, very dubious math. So, what we're basically going to do is, we're going to do what we did originally, but we're going to do it backwards, right? Not backwards, we're going to do it with a theoretical number. Yeah. So, the dubious way we're going to do this math, right? I have to try and remain composed, is because we did originally 0.6 bleed, and that became 0.12 bleed. It doubled in 500 kilograms. Oop. It doubled in 500 kilograms. Given that, given that 2,800 minus by 1,800 is a 1,000 kilogram thing, we can assume we're doubling it and then doubling it again to get the bleed value, right? So let's just do 4 times. So we do is we take our 1.22, right? As I said, we multiply it by 3. You get 3.66. We then times this by the bleed timer, which is 1.17, right? To get 428. So now we can do 428.22, right? So we can do 1800 times by 4.2822 to get 7,000 of that. We then multiply this now by 5 to get 38,000 bleed. Which is pretty impressive, right? That is pretty impressive. Yeah. 38,000 bleed is a lot of bleed. So, the last section I wanted to do is actually talk about some of the issues Allo has. The main one, as I told earlier on, is the speed of Allo is just a bit too slow. Buff up to 38 or 39 kilometers an hour, and buff dibble up. The grapple system needs to be changed. It just does. Unfortunately, we're seeing the issues with grapple again. Unfortunately, Raptor mains, I don't really care too much. I think if we nerf grapple, we should buff grapple in a different way. And I have an idea for this. I can talk about that tomorrow. Whatever. But grapple as it is right now just isn't functioning because of Allo. I don't really like the idea of just changing how grapple works for Allo, because then we're always going to have the argument of, well, if Raptor can do this, why can't Allo do this? Or even the inverse being, well, if Allo's is like this, why isn't Raptor's like this? I want to avoid that. I think it's better for the community if we just avoided that. But some issues with Allo that need to actually be addressed, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, some of them I'm not going to go into. The animation work for Allo, I am not going to go into. Someone else can rant about that. I'm not going to get annoyed or make accusations towards the state of Allo's development. I think they've done the best that they can do. I also understand that after the stressful time that was animating both Trike and Rex, who have a lot of animations, I do not blame there being issues with the animations for Allo, especially if a bunch of them are still placeholder. I perfectly understand. So I'm not going to go into it, because that's just an obvious cheap shot, in my opinion, towards the development team, to just say, oh, but the animations have wonky stuff. I agree. I also think it's a bit annoying, but it will be fixed, hopefully in the future. But I wanted to let you guys know that it is a personal opinion of mine that I do have, but I'm not going to put that into the video. As I've said, I understand from the animator's perspective, it is very, very stressful coming off the back of Rex and Trike. I understand. And that's all that I will say. But there are some issues with the growth, right? The Juvie and Sub feel really, really good. The Sub Allo feels like what Allo should be. It's got good agility. The Trot is not that bad. The crouch is really quite nice actually, and the speed's not bad. Like you hit around 41.3, I believe, speed kilometers an hour with sub Allo. A bit, pretty much actually where I would put sub Allo. And I think that Allo should be around 38 in my opinion. Bring Dibble back up to 35. And there are a lot of things you can actually change with Allo, especially the adult, right? The adult just needs to trot faster. It feels like a slug. It feels like you're walking through gravy or syrup. It feels unresponsive to the player. You know, it feels like it's very janky and it's turning and everything else. And these things can be fixed. But I feel like it is something that needs to be addressed. I don't want to have a situation where we completely nerf Allo and then don't fix how clunky it feels right now. Because that's just going to leave a very, very sour taste in people's mouths. And yeah, like obviously there are people who bought the Isle to play Allo. Allo's a very, very popular dinosaur. So I feel like, same with every single playable in the game, there needs to be a certain level of respect for that person's time and money and commitment to this game. Of just being like, cool, yeah, we're going to try and like do everything all at once. So I would say, whenever you do write your complaints about Allo, try to keep in mind the fact there are people who really like this playable and there are issues that are hampering it. Talking about some other issues with Allo, personally. Obviously, the bite speed is way too fast. We talked about this. It's a bit ridiculous. The fact that Allo's agility is actually comparable to a Stego, I think is rather impressive. I think the adult Allo should be more agile. Not to Serrano levels, of course not, no. But just more agile. It needs to feel better. There have been suggestions towards Allo Pin. For example, some people say that maybe Pin should be changed to 50% of your size, rather than, smaller than you. Or if Allo is at 65%, change it to 55%. Some people have suggested that how Pounce should work for Raptor and Allo above 50% of its weight is that it should actually knock down targets instead of pinning them. And then you need another Raptor or Allo to pounce them again to actually, pin them down. That's quite interesting. And you can get a follow-up attack from that, and just bite them. So you pounce something that's like over half your weight, you knock them down with Allo and Raptor, and then you start biting them and clawing them, But they're not pinned. They can still get back up and run away. You know what I mean? That might be quite interesting. It might be a less egregious way of handling the mechanic. Because it's never a real good idea in games to really take control away from a player, unless it's in very, 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 very particular circumstances. Like, for example, if you play a Pokemon game, ice puzzles are very, very famous. Losing control of your character on an ice puzzle is a worthwhile sacrifice for the ice puzzle, because it's ice. The same way that for Dino, for example, giant 8-ton croc in the water is meant to be the big, scary water thing. It can only get you in water. It can't really run onto land, grab you from a field, run back into the water, drown you. It's very localized, in the same way that the ice is. It's like a hazard. Pin, for example, I can just run at you, pin you. That's the... We want people to enjoy playing as Allo and Raptor and against Allo and Raptor. Both of them kind of have the same sort of issues. Some people have suggested increasing the Pounce stam cost to like 10%. I disagree with this, personally. I think 5% is fine. A suggestion that I've seen, at least personally with me, that's been gaining traction in my headspace, is the idea of a whiff animation. A lot of the animations in the game, like Carno Charge, Packy Ram, Serrano Charge Bite, Raptor and Allo Pounce, Rex's Crush Pin, some of like the Ceratopsian flip attacks like that, they have an end lag. Especially like Maya also has this as well, an end lag where the animation stops and like dinosaur recovers after like it has this momentum and it cancels the momentum and like pulls itself back. A whiff animation might be pretty good. The idea that if you miss the pounce on Raptor and Allo, and even things like Serrano Charge Bite, Carno Charge, Maya Flip, maybe even things like Tenno Kick and Tail Slam, for example, you are actually locked in place for a moment where someone could punish you for sending out that attack at the wrong time. That's just an idea. It's a thing. I do think I will send out a follow-up video in the future of what I personally would do to fix certain things with like Allo in terms of a balancing standpoint. But like right now, I don't think now's the time and place. especially I don't really want this video to keep going on, and it as is actually getting quite long. This video is. I don't really want that. So the final message I'll sort of leave you guys with is, I don't want Allo to get revenge nerfed. I don't want people to look at what is a bugged Allo with the grapple not being the best balance mechanic in the game. Same thing with pin, and then just be like, let's just gut Allo. Especially when Raptor still has those same issues. Let's not lie, like Raptor does need some changes too. Does Raptor need buffs? Of course it does. Of course it does. Does it need nerfs? Yes. You see how both of these statements are true at the exact same time, right? So you can be like, oh, a Turkish delight, you hate Raptor players, whatever you say, right? But it does need nerfs, it does need buffs. In fact, you could say it needs certain tune-ups. It needs to be tuned in a certain way. Same thing with Allo. They both expose the issue with these mechanics. Rex also exposed the issue with a pin mechanic as well. How many times do we need to go through a pin mechanic? And I don't like these are just changing it per species, because it just, it doesn't remove some of the aspects about the mechanic that isn't fun. Especially as very popular Raptor mains I've spoken to about pin have at least told me that, yeah, they started using the pin way more because of the time to kill with bites. If you could just bite the thing on the ground quicker than you could pin it without wasting stamina, yeah, just bite it to death. But the cooldown just makes it annoying. I'd rather just pin the Juvicerado. So I get it from like both sides. But I don't want to see either of these two dinosaurs like just getting completely gutted. I don't want it just to be like Grapple just getting snurfed with no compensation. I don't want to see Allo getting nerfed with no compensation. That's what I'm scared of. I'm really, really scared of it being like a Maya treatment or Dibble treatment. Or even currently Rex right now apparently isn't even that fun to play. I have to really go in and actually investigate Rex a bit more after the changes. But, I don't want to have these playables in a situation where, like, they overperform during the horde test, and then we just wheelchair them. We just put them into a wheelchair and then just call it a day. And then 6 months later, we give them a buff. And then people who still think that they're, too strong, even when they've been wheelchaired, just lose their mind at you suggesting that they should be buffed. Like, people still lose their mind if you suggest that Dibble should be more agile, right? But Dibble will be a separate topic that I might do a discussion video about. I have quite a few thoughts about Dibble. I'll be happy to bring them in. I have quite a lot of thoughts about a lot of things. I think I'm trying to get back into making YouTube videos. That's my main thing. Same thing with the devs as well. I don't mean to be a bootlicker, and I'm not even gonna mention the most serious issues I think Allo has. There's one issue it has, and I don't want to mention it because there's no way I can say it without making some people upset. But there are some issues with Allo. My friends know what my thoughts are about this, and I think it's rather bad that it exists, and I'm sure that the developers already know what it is. They need me to tell you guys, you can tell them. I'm more than happy to tell them myself my actual serious complaints. Which, of course, yes, makes me appear to be a bit like a bootlicker. But what I'm saying is, like, you're never going to, have a... How'd you say? You can never ask your boss for a raise at work if all you do is insult them all day. You kind of need to have a little bit of give and take, It's like, hey, mate, look, I know it's busy and yada, 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 but blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, we can't just insult the devs. The devs are trying to be very, very clear to us. And I am thinking of doing a series on this channel where I try and post daily updates on things that the devs have said, such that we avoid situations where people get things wrong or misinterpret sort of stuff. Especially as the R is a very global community, there are a lot of people who don't speak English as their first language. Maybe just having someone who actually patiently wants to go through to them and say, this is what was said, this is what they mean, this might also be what they mean, but it's probably this. That would be good. Same way I did it for the Dino video and the Carno video, where we went through past statements from the devs, blah, 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 in order to, explain something in detail. But either ways, that's the end of this video. It's getting on a bit too long. Potentially part 2 coming in, maybe a day or 2. I'll see you then. Thank you so much for the support. Please like and subscribe. I love you all. You can all fuck off now.